Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back. I started yesterday with a discussion on Karl Marx and his revolutionary rules. And today I want to talk about some of the principles in the Communist Party manifesto that was penned by Karl Marx. Now, one of the things that jumps out is the following quote: "The immediate aim of the communist is the same as that of all other proletarian parties: formation of the proletariat into a class, overthrow of the bourgeoisie supremacy, and conquest of political power by the proletariat." Now, this sounds kind of noble, wanting the workers, the proletariat, to have the power to govern themselves. This almost sounds like an idea from, say, the American Revolution or the French Revolution, but there's some important differences here. Now, the very next paragraph, a few paragraphs down, Marx states, "The distinguishing feature of communism is not the abolition of property generally, but the abolition of the bourgeoisie property. But modern bourgeois private property is the final and most complete expression of the system of production and appropriating products that is based on class antagonism, on the exploitation of the many by the few. In this sense, the theory of the communists may be summed up in a single sentence: abolition of private property." Now, I have a problem with these two paragraphs here, these two basic statements, in that the latter paragraph, by default, assumes that the bourgeoisie are using class antagonism to rob the proletariat of its work. But in the former paragraph, it discusses the formation of the proletariat into a class. Now, if the bourgeoisie didn't form the proletariat into a class, yet they are making their money off the backs of a petty class through the use of antagonism, we've got a chicken and egg question here. Because how can the proletariat exist before it's formed into a class? And therefore the bourgeoisie can't be using class antagonism to exploit the proletariat if the proletariat is not already a class. Sounds really wacky, sounds really kooky, but people actually buy into this. These contradictions are very slight and very subtle, but they're very much noticeable. And if you're not paying real attention, and you're just taking everything in the manifesto as true, you can easily miss it. And it's part of what's led to some of this cultural Marxism, which we'll do a whole separate video on at a later date. Now, so the basic idea is, yes, hey, you made all of this, but you made us work here as well. You took advantage of us by stealing our labor. So now we're going to take all of this that you made from you at gunpoint, and you get nothing. Then we're going to run it for our own benefit. And there's a fundamental issue here, in that the entire idea behind the communist revolution is that it is okay to take something from one group for your own group's benefit. That the proletariat can just take whatever they want from the bourgeoisie. Now, he gives a few justifications in this section of the manifesto. The very next paragraph states the following: "We communists have been reproached with the desire of abolition of rights of personal property, acquiring property as the fruit of a man's own labor, which property is alleged to be the groundwork of all personal freedom, activity, and independence." That's the end of the quote there. Well, just above this, he stated, that communism was summed up in one sentence: the abolition of private property. So here he goes again. Minor contradictions. He's saying that they're reproached for this idea because private property is how men show their independence, by gaining capital to turn around and acquire private property. And that's not what they're looking at. Yet, he specifically stated that the abolition of private property is the primary goal of the communist revolution. And if you can't have private property, then you can't advance or move in a society from one class to another. You can't leave inheritance to your children so that they can move to a better class position in a government or in a society. So what you basically do is you stop people from moving amongst the social ladders in society. And that's very different than what most people really want. I mean, here in the United States, people are moving constantly in society from upper class to upper middle class to middle lower class. There is a large amount of movement up and down the social ladder in the United States. So much so that people in the Forbes 100 richest, 400 richest, and even 50 richest or wealthiest men, women, or people, you see movement on a regular basis, because Forbes posts this every year. They do their top 400 people in the world and their top 100 people in the United States. And people move on and off of these lists in the United States. Now, when you look at other countries, people who are rich really stay rich. They don't move. Their riches are either confiscated by the government or not. And if they're not confiscated by the government, they just stay rich. Period. End of story. So the driving force on capitalism is actually the movement in classes and the movement in doing business. Now remember, the idea of a free government in a capitalist system is only about 50 to 100 years old by the time Marx is around. This is way back in history, people. We are talking, this is early 1800s. Now he justifies this idea with this set of statements. The hard one, self-acquired, self-earned property. Do you mean the property of the petty artisan or of the small peasant, a form of property that preceded the bourgeoisie form? There's no need to abolish that. The development of industry has to a great extent already destroyed it, and is still destroying it daily. Now, this idea comes back to the difference in how society changed between the feudal management system and either the modern democratic socialist or democratic parliamentarian or even representative republic like the United States was moving. Back in the Middle Ages, peasants did have the right to hold personal property, but it was personal property of their own possession. So, small bits of jewelry, maybe some additional money, maybe a few gems. If you were really rich and you could read, you could own a couple of books in the Renaissance. You know, you might have some nice clothes, maybe a pet, maybe some really nice furniture. That was about it. Those were kind of personal possessions. And he was saying that basically the idea of that is falling to the wayside. People already have that right. Nobody cares about that. That's just part of the social norm. What he's talking about taking is the business property of people. And he's saying that the petty artisan doesn't exist anymore because we've got these big factories that are producing things such as textiles. And those factories need to be taken from the people who built them, who paid the money and took the risk and acquired the machinery and took on the loan, and then hired the workers to operate them. They need to be taken from them and given to the workers that are there themselves, and let the workers run the whole thing. Now, this is kind of a whack job idea. I mean, what does a looms person know about running a company? What does a looms person know about product risk analysis? I mean, this was just insane. It was just way out there. And yet people still buy into this today. And if things were really being destroyed by this movement to private property, and even the bourgeoisie form of private property, then why are we seeing a return of the small artisan? For like the past 60 years in the United States, small businesses have been starting to slowly flourish again. Now, there was a huge hit on them in the at the end of the 1920s, right as the major recession of the Great Depression occurred. And they were slowed down a bit in the 80s, and even right at the end of the 90s. But as time has progressed, we've created things like Etsy and eBay, which has allowed small businesses to become more flexible and to operate more independently. It allowed people to work out of their homes and produce things without massive means of production, because they can buy a few simple bits of production and operate them in their own home. Now we're even looking at things like 3D printers, which can print things directly and produce things in your home, and small CNC routing machines that are the size of a little couch table, which can produce small and medium objects and allow people to produce things in their own home. I mean, the idea that we need to eliminate all of the bourgeoisie property, it would not just kill these people, it would stop most of the food production in the United States. Because even the small farmer, who's actually turning a profit, is selling to these conglomerate food corporations, and that food production capability would not be that farmer's anymore. All the research and design into new technologies and new ideas that go on in the United States by these private think tanks and these private technology firms and these private science firms would be gone. The only thing that would be allowed to be done would be government-mandated research and design from government bureaucrats determining what the government wants to do. Now, in this section of the manifesto, Marx does try to redefine capital as well. But first we want to look at what the dictionary defines capital as. And the Merriam-Webster dictionary defines capital as a stock of accumulated goods, especially at a specific time and in contrast to the income received for a specific period. Now, there's a couple more definitions here for it. The value of these accumulated goods, the accumulated goods devoted to a production of another good, or the accumulation of possessions including property and income. Now, this is production capital. This is private capital. Now, Marx thinks of capital in the following way. Capital is a collective product, and only by the united actions of many members, nay, in the last resort, only by the united action of all members of society, can it be set in motion. Capital is therefore not personal, it is a social power. Well, let's be true here. Capital is not a social power. Capital is an accumulation of goods, incomes, private properties. Capital has always been an individual product. And Karl Marx tried to redefine it in his manifesto to a social power. But the truth of the matter is, unless everyone can own everyone else's capital, that means every dollar in your neighborhood belongs to every member of your neighborhood. Capital can never be a social power. It either has to be private or non-existent. Because if it's private, then that means I can take possession of a piece of capital. Like the dollar bill in my wallet, which is an indicator of an amount of labor that I have performed. It's a capital gain on my end. And it's a representation of the capital worth that I have accumulated. And I can use that capital to purchase another good. But without that kind of capability, capital just doesn't exist. So it can't be a social power. So, as you can see, most of these Marxist ideals are based entirely around a collectivist mindset. And the idea that a group can manage itself for its own good. Unfortunately, this idea is far more utopian than realistic, in that every individual is looking out for every individual's own good. And while I might care about my neighbors, I don't really know the person that lives in Boise, Idaho, that just got attacked, or the person in Chicago who needs money out of my pocket to pay his rent, or the person in Dusseldorf who can't afford for his own apartment. Those are not what my concerns as an individual ever are. Now, those concerns are concerns of government, because government has to manage large groups of people. And a collectivist like Marx likes the idea of a large group of people managing the affairs of that group of people. However, that kind of collectivism comes back to the old statement of, you've got two wolves and a sheep, and the wolves vote to have sheep for dinner. What's the sheep to do? Because once you go to a collectivist mindset, and collectivism is all you can use, and you give up all personal responsibility to the collective, the second the collective decides that you are better use to them dead than alive, you have no recourse. Which is why collectivism innately fails. Human beings innately want the right to choose for themselves. It was part of what the Declaration of Independence was talking about, and what much of the founding of the United States was pushing for. Because without that fundamental right to choose for oneself and to think for oneself, you lose the basic better nature of humanity, and it becomes a much darker idea. Well, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe. I'm going to include some links in the description. One link will be to a digital copy of Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto, translated to English, available through Amazon.com. The other is a link to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary's definitions of capital. I took it from the third selection down, which discusses actual production capital versus the tops of columns, or the grammatical use of capital case letters. Also, just a reminder, I am on Minds.com, so come on over there, join us, subscribe to me there if you'd like to know more about what I'm blotting out in 160 characters or less. And thank you and have a good day.